Morning, folks. My name is John, and this is the Homestead Diary. Been having a lot of thoughts recently, well, I guess probably the past couple of years, about a storm. And you can kind of see from the gray sky, maybe. It's predicted that there's a storm coming. And that storm's supposed to take the form of high winds most of the day, and then eventually rain all night long, and then clearing up. I don't know if it's related to the nor'easter that's currently bearing down, or if it's just some unrelated storm. But anyway, we live in a society that expects normal. There's a normalcy bias, so they say, that you always expect things to just return to the way that they are, or the way that they were. And no matter how bad it gets, it's just going to go back and it'll be fine. And I don't know, I've had misgivings about that for a long time. And I think my first hint that things could go wildly wrong came when my brother gave me a book called Ishmael. And Ishmael, in the book, is a teacher. And oddly enough, he is I believe is a lowland gorilla, of all things, that's in an office space somewhere. And the student, so to speak, shows up, and the gorilla begins teaching him. And he teaches him about society, and he tells him stories. Stories that a lot of cultures would call myths and legends. And he begins talking about the Greek gods and the Roman gods and these myths and legends. And then he goes all the way into myths and legends of the American people. And he describes the myth, the national belief in manifest destiny, that we are destined to be a great nation and rule the world, or at least rule from coast to coast. And that was kind of the early on myth that was taught by the founding fathers, and eventually it manifested itself. But with that manifestation of that belief also came a belief of invincibility, a belief that we are creating this great thing that will always stand and will never fall. And Ishmael, the teacher, likened it to imagine that you are a manufacturer, not a manufacturer, but you're building a plane. And you don't necessarily know anything about flying. You may know a little bit, things like the wind's got to go faster underneath the bottom of the wing than the top of the wing, and that creates the lift and all that kind of stuff. And so you have some basic ideas of what a plane's supposed to look like. But then you decide to try out your plane. And where best to try out your plane than off a giant cliff, thousands of feet in the air. And you get a running start, and you jump off in the plane, and then you start flying, and you're doing great. You're like, wow, this is so exciting. I'm flying. And really, you're not flying. You're falling. You're falling toward the ground, but you don't see it because your eyes are focused on the horizon. And you don't think that you're going to fall. You think, well, I'm just flying. And until you hit the ground, you still are under the illusion that you're flying, when in fact you're not flying, you're falling. And he drew that analogy to tell us to look at our society. We've had an amazing run of it, 230, 240 plus years of starting out as a new nation, doing what they call the grand experiment, an experiment that had never been tried before. And so much of it sounded amazing, and so much of it still sounds amazing. It still sounds very appealing. But the problem is, at this point, we're not really flying anymore. And it may have seemed like we were flying early on, and maybe we did initially. But now it's gotten to the point where we're falling, and the ground is rushing up to meet us. And most people don't see it. Most people don't. But I started to see it after I read that book for the first time. I probably read it 3 or 4 times since then. And it really got me to thinking and wondering, what can I do about this? And the book didn't really offer any solutions. That was one of the disturbing things about Ishmael. I think I'm trying to remember the name of the author, Daniel Quinn, Quinn. Quite a fascinating read. He also wrote a book called The Story of B, which is kind of a sequel to Ishmael. But anyway, he didn't offer any, what were to me, practical real-world solutions. There was a lot of talk of making people aware and building that awareness into a movement of some sort. It's been a long time since I read the book, so I don't know if it was really nothing more than trying to describe a grand socialist experiment or whatever it was. I could be wrong. But to me, it didn't offer solutions. What it did to me is it created a sense of overwhelm and a sense of there's nothing that I can do. We think we're flying, but really we're just falling, and we're just waiting to hit the ground. And several years went by, and I finally came upon a movie called Collapse. Now, Collapse was basically an interview done on the author Michael Ruppert, who wrote several different books, many of them politically inspired. I think one of